Fleming and Victoria's marriage once seemed perfect. They had shared laughter, love, and dreams of a future together. But as time passed, small cracks began to form, eventually creating a chasm between them. What started as petty arguments evolved into deeper, more frequent conflicts, leaving Fleming frustrated and emotionally distant. He felt that Victoria had become cold, disconnected, and had stopped caring about their relationship. In his growing frustration, Fleming decides that a drastic measure is needed to restore order. He'll teach Victoria a lesson. Convinced that this will bring her back to him, Fleming sets in motion a plan he believes will fix their marriage, unaware of the far-reaching consequences his actions will have. Fleming and Victoria's marriage began to crumble slowly, almost imperceptibly. At first, it was small misunderstandings, miscommunications that could have been easily overlooked. But over time, these moments of neglect and emotional distance piled up, leaving a sense of disconnection that neither of them knew how to fix. Fleming tried talking to Victoria, but every conversation seemed to end in arguments or silence. Victoria became more withdrawn, focused on work or her own interests, leaving Fleming feeling neglected and alone. He began to resent her for what he saw as her indifference to their once happy life. Meanwhile, Victoria seemed increasingly distant, not understanding Fleming's growing frustration. She thought their problems were temporary, but they lingered longer than either of them expected. Fleming, feeling lost, was convinced he had to do something drastic to make Victoria understand how he was feeling. However, deep down, he feared their relationship was beyond saving, but didn't know how to address it. Fleming's growing frustration led him to a decision. He would emotionally withdraw from Victoria. He reasoned that if he pulled away, she might feel the pain he had been experiencing. Perhaps then she would realize how serious things had become between them. He planned to be distant, cold, and unavailable, hoping this would make her crave the connection they once had. In his mind, this was the only way to get through to her. He justified his actions by convincing himself that he wasn't being manipulative. He was simply teaching Victoria a lesson, showing her how it felt to be ignored and unloved. Fleming believed that after feeling his absence, she would understand what she had been taking for granted and would fight to restore their bond. He thought the tension and emotional withdrawal would be the catalyst for healing, unaware of how dangerous his manipulation could be. His confidence in the plan grew, and he began executing it, blind to the potential fallout that lay ahead. Victoria's confusion and frustration began to grow as Fleming's behavior changed. At first, she thought it was just a phase, maybe the result of stress or work pressures, but as days turned into weeks, it became clear that something was wrong. Fleming was distant, hardly speaking to her, and when they did talk, it was with cold formality. Victoria tried to bridge the gap, but every attempt to reach out was met with indifference or avoidance. Slowly, she started to change in response to Fleming's coldness. She began staying out later, perhaps to avoid the tension at home. She became more secretive, keeping her phone close and her thoughts even closer. The once warm atmosphere of their home had shifted into one of unspoken tension. Fleming watched her behavior shift, but his resolve to teach her a lesson kept him from confronting her. In fact, seeing her respond with increasing distance only reinforced his belief that his plan was working, but in reality it was pushing her further away. Little did he know his actions were driving Victoria to a breaking point. One day, Fleming came home early from work, his mind swirling with thoughts of his plan and the growing coldness between him and Victoria. He expected the house to be empty, as it often was when he came back. But today, as he entered through the front door, he heard voices coming from the living room. His heart skipped a beat as he silently walked closer, unsure of what he would find. His eyes widened in disbelief as he saw Victoria sitting on the couch, laughing with another man, a man Fleming had never seen before. The sight shattered him, his thoughts racing as he tried to process the scene in front of him. The anger surged within him, but so did a deep sense of hurt. Was this the consequence of his plan? Was Victoria reacting to his emotional withdrawal? Was this her way of showing him that she had already moved on? His body went numb, and for a long moment he just stood there, frozen in place. He wanted to shout, confront her, demand answers, but he couldn't bring himself to do it. The pain of seeing her with another man, combined with the realization that his actions might have pushed her away, left him reeling. His internal conflict intensified. Had he truly been right in thinking this was the only way to fix their marriage, or had he made a grave mistake? Fleming's heart pounded as he quietly backed out of the room, retreating to his car without a word. He needed to process what he had just witnessed, but the storm of emotions inside him made it impossible to think clearly. Sitting alone in his car, Fleming's mind spiraled. Guilt gnawed at him. He had done this to himself, hadn't he? Hadn't he created the distance between them? He began to question everything. Was his plan to withdraw really about fixing the relationship? Or was it about punishing Victoria for her perceived neglect? He had wanted her to understand his pain, but had he gone too far? He felt betrayed, but also responsible. His thoughts swirled between hurt and self-blame, and for the first time he began to see the consequences of his actions. Had he broken something that was already beyond repair? The anger that had initially flared began to simmer into a deep sadness. He wasn't sure how to feel anymore, only that the distance he had created was now irreversible. The tension in their house only grew in the days following Fleming's discovery. Victoria no longer tried to hide the fact that she was emotionally distant. She packed her things, a quiet finality in her every movement. When she looked at Fleming, there was no love left in her eyes, only a quiet resolve. She had reached her breaking point, and she had made her decision. She was done. As she took her bags and left, Fleming stood silently, unable to find the words to stop her. His plan had backfired, and now the reality of their fractured marriage became painfully clear. The woman he had hoped would fight for their relationship had already moved on, emotionally and physically. The house that once felt like home now felt empty, hollow. Fleming's heart sank as he realized the mistake he had made. His attempt to teach her a lesson, to force her to feel the pain he had been carrying, had only driven them further apart. The finality of her departure left him stunned, realizing too late that manipulation had never been the answer. In the quiet aftermath of Victoria's departure, Fleming was left to reflect on his actions. He could no longer deny the truth. Manipulating someone in a relationship was never the solution. He had tried to teach Victoria a lesson, but all he had done was destroy the trust and love they had once shared. As he sat alone, the weight of his mistakes settled in. He realized how much they had both needed communication, honesty, and understanding, not games, not manipulation. He had believed that by making Victoria feel his absence, she would come to appreciate him again, but in reality, it had only pushed her further away. Fleming's heart ached as he thought about the years they had spent together, the love they had once shared, and the deep emotional toll his actions had taken on both of them. The marriage was over, and he knew there was no going back. The lesson was clear. Sometimes the hardest thing to do is simply talk, to be open, to communicate. He had lost his marriage, but in the process, he had learned an invaluable, painful lesson. Fleming sat alone in the silence of their now empty home, the weight of his actions crushing him. The marriage he had once hoped to fix was gone, and with it, a part of himself. He had tried to teach Victoria a lesson, but in the end, he had only taught himself a painful truth. Manipulation and distance can never replace honest communication and love. As he stared at the empty space, Fleming knew that sometimes the very thing we do to teach someone a lesson is what destroys us.